Welcome to In the Seams, a podcast by Broken and Mended. And now your host, David Heflin.
Welcome back to In the Seams. In this interview, I talked to Nate Brooks. Nate Brooks has written a book called Disrupted Journey, and it is focused on the plight of the loved one, the caregiver, in this case, the spouse of someone who's going through chronic illness and chronic pain. And I'm excited to interview Nate about that because I feel like I don't think enough attention is given to chronic illness and chronic pain for the one that's going through that, and even less is available for people who are on the caregiving and loved one side of things. And we have had people talk about that before on this show, which you'll see in the show notes, different podcasts, episodes that we've had, one time with a couple of men that were the husbands of people going through, like Nate, their wives were going through this difficult challenge. We've also had Emily Maritz on this show, who has a ministry dedicated to that at calltowatch.com. And so we've touched on this, but I don't think we feel like we could ever really touch on it enough for as important of an issue as it really is. The interview itself, we talk about a wide array of topics, most of it coming from the topics brought up in his book, and some other things that we kind of add along the way, just as it related to his personal journey and mine. But it was a very good interview. I know you'll be blessed by it. Talk about relationships and how they change as a chronic illness, and how we prioritize which relationships we're going to invest in. But also talking about how, as the spouse of someone who's going through this, how we can carry this burden in a little bit more of a authentic way with God through lament, but also with our spouse, if you're in that situation, by being accountable for those times maybe when you weren't at your best while they were going through what they were going through, and just being willing to really share authentically in that journey together, not allowing yourselves to become isolated from one another because you don't know how to speak about the different burdens that you're carrying. So it's a very, very important topic, and I'm glad that we were able to get into that. We get into some of the resource that Nate has, and also his wife Kate, nateandbrooks.com. And talk about some of the things that are available for people out there. But most of all, certainly encourage you to get his book. It is available now. It's called Disrupted Journey, and you should be able to find, I'll put a few links in the show notes, but you should be able to find it in various different places where you buy your books now. And I think it's going to be a blessing to so many people. So I hope you enjoy the episode. We're very glad that you have joined us again on In the Seams, and which is a part of our ministry with Broken and Mended. So God bless you as you listen to this episode. Well, I'm pleased to welcome Nate Brooks to In the Seams today, and I'm excited to get to interview Nate because he's talking about a topic. He's written a book about a topic that is not talked about very much. There's not a lot of resources to help people that are in this situation, and it's from the perspective of assisting people, caring for people, loving people that are going through chronic illness and chronic pain. And so as a person who suffers with chronic pain, I know I appreciate how my wife walks beside me in that. And I've also been on the other side a little bit of that with my son. But I just know there's not a whole lot out there for people in order to help guide them through this difficult journey. And Nate has written a book called Disruptive Journey, and he's going to be telling us about that. But first of all, Nate, just welcome to the show. We're glad to have you.
I'm so glad to be here, David. Thank you for inviting me on to have a conversation about something that I think is near and dear to both of our hearts today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a connection. Your real good friend, Jeremy Wright, and Jeremy and Alicia, you wrote, you acknowledged them in the dedication of your book. And I know you said he's one of your best friends. And so I just want to mention that Jeremy has been on In the Seams. I think it's been a good couple of years ago. It was a dual interview with another Jeremy, a friend of mine, and they both husbands who had wives that were going through a chronic illness. And so I'm going to put that in the show notes in case someone's listening, a new listener, or didn't listen to it in the past, and they want to go back and listen to that too, because I really thought that was such an edifying conversation. Nate, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know that you're a counselor. You're also a professor.
Mhm.
And I don't want to get anything wrong here, but is it Southeastern Theological Seminary? Is it?
Yeah, you
Okay.
got that right there,
All
David.
right.
So I guess the day job is I'm a professor of counseling at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And that's one of the 6 Southern Baptist seminaries. And I teach mainly courses on abuse and trauma and kind of that space. I also am the director of Courage Christian Counseling, which is a small practice. It's a virtual practice that does counseling for trauma, abuse, and then a lot of chronic pain and illness type things as well. So I'm a member of Faith Baptist Church here in Youngsville, and we've got 3 young kiddos in our home. And I guess I'm here talking today because, chronic pain and illness is kind of the unwanted visitor that just doesn't leave in our household as well.
Right, right. Yeah, it doesn't leave. It's certainly an unwelcome intruder, and of course you write about that and the struggle that your wife has been through. I did appreciate, by the way, as we get into your book, the way that you told the story from your perspective, allowing Kate's story. Your wife's name's Kate, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
you got it.
allowing Kate to tell her own story in her own way, but still was a very real story, and that you were able to include enough of what she was going through to at least help us understand what it was like for you as a husband. And so I want to ask, because your book does come from a place of a personal struggle, but also a place where there are a few available resources to help. And so what prompted you to decide to share your story this way and to write this book?
Mm-hmm. So this is, I think, the 3rd book that I've published all total. So the writing career has predated the really difficult seasons of chronic pain and illness in some ways. So I think I'm someone that has always enjoyed writing. I remember I probably started writing at 14, 15 years old, something like that. So, 25 years ago. Um, and the origin of this one, I guess, so I've always been a writer personally, but the origin of this one really came from, I put together 2 blog posts for the Biblical Counseling Coalition, uh, which is kind of a major biblical counseling website, and I write for it occasionally. A couple posts on just 10 points of being a caregiver for someone who's dealing with chronic pain and illness. And I think those things were released like November 21st. And when they released their top 10 posts of the year on December 31st, it was like number 5 or 6. So in the span of a month, it leapfrogged almost all the other content that they'd had. And and I got more feedback from that article than I'd ever gotten. I thought, you know what, like, okay, the things that I myself am learning and working through, they're resonating with other people. And the Lord's called us all to different kind of roles. And as someone that does write, if I can write words that help give people maybe framework or language or feel not particularly alone in their struggle, as this one is incredibly isolating, then that seemed a positive benefit. And Kate was totally on board the project. Every word in it she has read and said, yes, say this. She was incredibly helpful in helping frame a lot of things. And that's kind of the origin of the book there. We wanted to tell a story that helped people see and not feel alone.
So you really struck a chord then with those blog posts, and I'll be happy to find that and put it in our show notes for people to check that out as well. I'm assuming it's still available out there.
Yeah.
But I appreciate just the closeness you and your wife had in this project, and how she was a part of helping you frame it. And that's I think it's really, really cool that you guys are able to stick so close together through all of this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the phrases, and it's early in your book, and it just kind of sticks with me. You say here, suffering isn't a season, it's the climate. And the climate, that's not a way I've thought to phrase it before, but when I read that, I thought that's perfect. That's a perfect way to speak about what chronic illness is like. And I want you, though, to speak for just a moment to the benefit of really accepting that
Mhm.
this is a climate and not just a season. And so, kind of, how can seeing chronic illness and pain as the climate instead of a season facilitate acceptance and endurance on this difficult journey?
Well, that's a super easy question to get out
Yeah.
the gate with here, David. Oh man. I mean, that's the horrible tension, isn't it, of this life where is acceptance giving up hope and despair?
Right. Yeah.
Or is pursuing additional medical possibilities, is hoping that something might change, is that just the foolhardy quest of something that'll never happen? And how on earth to navigate that, I don't know. And it's probably very case by case basis for each procedure and each possibility, but then also each individual, each relationship. So I think one of the things that idea really came out of some conversations that Kate and I had, where we simply had to acknowledge that the truth of the matter is that she probably wasn't going to get better, and that even if she got better, it was going to be incrementally better. It wasn't holistically better, and that we needed, for our own sake, to let go of how we had structured life. So, we rewrote all of life, to where, we started shuffling what my job looked like, and we stopped homeschooling, and our kids are part of a charter school now. We actually wound up moving cities, and I took a new job partially because there was a better health system here than there. And we finally had to just come to the point of saying, you know what, like this, we have to assume that this is permanent. So, with this being permanent, now the question becomes, what kind of life do we build now, rather than waiting for it to pass? I guess it's the same thing, with the sentence that you read there. There's a difference between pulling that light jacket out of your closet and putting on 3 or 4 sweatshirts, versus acknowledging that no, we've moved to Rochester, New York, and this is like 9 feet of snow, and we need to go ahead and actually buy the puffy jackets. We need to actually buy those things that are going to be needed, versus when we get snow in North Carolina, that's cold for a couple days and then we'll be fine. um, I think understanding that it's a climate lets you, it gives you permission to go ahead and make the changes that you really need to make.
And I agree with you about it being a tension, because it's hard to recognize when you kind of move from that phase where you were hoping it was a season to accepting that this is going to be with you for the long haul, without feeling like you're giving up believing that God could heal you if He wanted to, and if you
Hmm.
should still pray for healing and all of that. These are difficult things to wrestle with, and obviously they're very personal for people. I think people are going to be different places on their journey as they go through this. I don't remember a decisive moment in my own journey where I realized that this is the climate, so to speak. But I do know that I got there, and there was a sense of, it was helpful to me when I did accept that that's where I was, and could start envisioning life a little bit different than trying to still have the life I used to have. It was helpful to be
Hmm.
able to move. Not easy, but helpful. And speaking of not easy, of course, there's a lot of grief here, and it's important to grieve what we lose and not to kind of just cover that up or to pretend like everything's okay when it's not. You really do a great job in your book of talking about the importance of lament and honest lament. You obviously refer a lot to Job and some of the Psalms. And what I found was interesting, though, and I think this is something I can even just incorporate into my own discussion with people about lament, because I'm always pushing for more lament in our churches as well as individually and corporately, because, as you know, there's not much of that, generally speaking, in the
No,
evangelical
there's
world.
not.
Yeah. But you talk about a faithful way to do this, and an unfaithful way, and of course you do get into that in a little bit of detail in your book. But for our listeners, and hopefully they will also want to get further into this and read the book. But can you expound on that point a little bit? What does a faithful way to lament look like versus an unfaithful way?
Hmm. Faithful lament is, I think it's the heart crying out in response to sorrow and grief. Right? And we don't have to look very far in the Bible before we see righteous versions of lament. We see it in Jesus's life over and over again. We see it, of course, in the Psalms and Job and many others as well, where you have righteous people who are bitter of soul, who are sorrowful, who are grieving the fact that there's pain that they're encountering. And that's a righteous emotion, right? Jesus was the most emotionally healthy person who ever walked the face of the earth. And you see him, Luke 22, the Garden of Gethsemane, almost coming undone over what was about to happen to him. And and that means that actually that gives us permission, and I would say it gives us a mandate to experience those emotions when we come across those life undoing things as well. At the same time, I had a colleague at a seminary that I used to work for, a colleague by the name of Bob Cara. He was an old New Testament professor, been there for 35 years. And he used to say all the time, we want to be balanced as the Bible is balanced. And so when I read those deep, deep statements of grief, right? Psalm 88, darkness is my only friend. Things like that. Like, we are meant to resonate with that. And we're also meant to resonate with come quickly, Lord Jesus. And we're meant to resonate with when I am weak, he is strong. And we're meant to resonate with his mercies are new every morning. And so it's a faithful lament is lament that recognizes grief and sorrow and feels the right and appropriate feelings in response to those griefs and sorrows, turning to God and to others with our sorrows and cares. And unfaithful lament either looks like shoving that to the side or by having lament be the only key that we can play a song in. Failing and lament can be
That's interesting. Yeah.
unfaithful when we forget the fact that God's mercies are new every morning. We forget the fact that when we're weak, He is strong. We forget the fact that He's coming again. And to when lament becomes the only song that we sing, I think that's when you start seeing us begin to stray from what faithful lament is.
Well, thank you, for that, because I think it is important. I think, sometimes I've seen with chronic illness, chronic pain, and again, I admit I'm more looking at it right now from the person with the chronic pain and illness side of things, just because that's who I mostly deal with. But I can see that sometimes lament can turn in, or maybe it didn't even start out as lament. It really was something other than that. A kind of self pity that never is
Mm-hmm.
directed back toward God, and so I could appreciate that, but I really appreciated the way that you brought that out in your book, and I hope that will
Mm-hmm.
inspire other people to go and check that out and really think about it for themselves and how they relate to God. We want people to feel like they can be completely honest and true with God about what they're going through and what they've lost, and crying out in desperation, but at the same time I like that idea, this balanced view. And that's not what did you say? It wasn't the only
Wasn't the
note
only key.
yeah, the only key that
Yeah.
we.
Like I'm gonna out my wife here for a second.
Okay.
She really enjoys the band Queen. And so like the song Bohemian Rhapsody, I think in a lot of ways that song is a helpful structure for thinking through what righteous emotions look like, in the sense that there's a ton of different movements across its however many minutes there, right? Like it's a song that's not entirely cohesive, but it's very coherent. And so
Mm,
there are times and seasons where lament is going to be strongest. And then there's going to be times and seasons, there's going to be different movements in the song, if you will, where like that hope in God is stronger. And there's going to be times when, when there's more joy, more delight. And we're meant to understand that it's okay. Like it's okay for us to weave those through at different times and different seasons, and not to be just locked into like I am lament, I am joy, or I have to move from lament to joy. No, it's much more blended together, like Bohemian Rhapsody is, with a bunch of different kind of callbacks to various
Sure.
melodies and styles of music throughout its, I don't know, it's like 7 or 8 minutes.
Well, now I'm going to have to link the song to in the show notes, so people can go and get that personal experience from that perspective. I think that's great. One of the things I appreciated about your book too is what you talk about in chapter 5, and it's about sin. And the reason why I appreciate you dealing with this is because I think sometimes we can avoid, those of us that are going through this journey on either side, caregiver or as the person that's suffering with it, because we become a bit sensitive when people bring up sin. And I think it's because of what we see a lot in the prosperity gospel, and I've seen a lot of people that have kind of been, harmed by the idea that, well, a little bit like Job's friends, right? When they're just saying, well, hey, if you just confess this great sin you did that caused all this to happen to you,
Yeah.
you'll be fine. And people have experienced versions of that with this. But if we avoid talking about sin, then that's not healthy either. So I appreciate that you were willing to do that, and particularly in how it impacts our relationships with others. And so I wanted to
Mhm.
ask if you could elaborate a little bit on sort of the pressure, the emotions of caring for someone with chronic pain and illness, and how that can sometimes lead us to situations where there are personal failings. And you talk some about self-awareness. So how does self-awareness and accountability play in helping us stay faithful in that?
Mhm. Again, professionally, I'm a counselor. And one of the things that I find myself asking a lot of my clients, especially if I'm working with a husband and a wife who perhaps got in a large argument or something like that, I'll ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best version of yourself and 1 being the worst version of yourself, what was your frame of mind coming into this discussion that led to the argument?
Hmm,
Uh, and most of the time, both of them will say, we were not the best versions of ourselves.
sure.
And I appreciate that language of just recognizing that, like, we're human beings who are broken and flawed, and there are times that we are better versions of ourselves and worse versions of ourselves. And when we are really hard pressed, we're oftentimes not the best version of ourselves, right? When life is about survival, um, we tend to let a lot of other things go. And really, as Christians, we think about that as an opportunity for temptation to sin to arise. Right. So just thinking through our family life, like when Kate's, I mean, we ride the roller coaster the same as everybody else, right? There's better weeks and then there's worse weeks. And sometimes that's a rotation between, like, the worst week is unsustainable and the good week is just pretty darn hard, right? That's kind of the as good as it gets or as bad as it gets. On those weeks that it's borderline unsustainable, I'm not the best version of myself, right? Kate's
Sure.
not the best version of herself, and that leads to temptation to sin, to take out fear, anxiety, worry, frustration, anger, sadness, despair, to take that out on each other. And there's times that I've certainly done that, right? Or just get prickly and sin against my spouse. And I think there's that temptation to not talk about sin because isn't that just heaping up a heavier burden on someone who's already heavily burdened? But if we take the entirety of scriptures seriously, in First John, John says, if we say we have no sin, we lie and the truth is not in us. And I think I used to think about that verse primarily in terms of it's like a big umbrella over, yeah, like I'm a sinner. Think about it more in the category of conversion. But the more I live, the more I think about it in particular moments too. Like, if I say I have no sin on Thursday with my wife, I deceive myself and the truth is not in me. And then the next verse is, if we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And so, really, like, calling sin sin and acknowledging it as such, it's not heaping up a burden on someone, it's taking a burden away, of recognizing that God expects us to sin against each other, in the sense that God's very realistic about who we are. We're streaky beings. And he gives us a promise of saying, if you confess the sin, I will forgive it. And if you're married to someone righteous as well, they'll forgive it too. And that gives us the ability to just be honest about sin and not to have to hide it or try and shade it away. God sees it, we see it, so let's just bring it to light and deal with it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it was somewhat of a breakthrough for me at some point when, like you said, some of my worst days, not the best version of myself, being short with my wife and even with my kids. And then at some point early in this, maybe was trying to justify that but I didn't feel good, and that's why I did this. And I found it so much more freeing to say, I'm sorry that I spoke to you that way, and
Mm-hmm.
not use what I was going through as an excuse. Yes, it's a contributing factor. Of course it is. Just like any stress is in life is a contributing factor to temptation and a potential for sin. But yes, it brings so much more healing in the relationship, much more health in the relationship when we can speak honestly about the times that we let each other down and not pretend like, well, we have to be perfect, because we're not going to be. So appreciate that. Appreciate you bringing 1 John 1:8-9, and really we can just kind of talk about all of 1 John. Is so good in teaching us about sin and faithfulness to Christ, and
Mm-hmm.
confessing our sin to one another and to God. So thank you for that. All right. Well, we're going to shift gears just a little bit. Well, still staying kind of idea with couples in particular. What are some of the key areas that couples need to have open and honest conversations to redefine their roles, expectations, and intimacy in the context of ongoing health challenges? And so I know, again, that's like most of these questions, maybe a lot to kind of, pack into, a question there. But I guess what we're really asking is, all right, we had this, what life looked like before chronic illness and pain entered into the picture. And in that situation, we had certain expectations and roles.
Yep.
How does that look different? And how do we need to communicate about those differences as we move
Mm-hmm.
forward with chronic illness and pain?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. I think our experience of it has been right. So every Friday night is pizza night in our household, as I think is for majority
Yeah, I
of
was going to say us
families in
too.
America. It seems like, right?
Right.
Yeah. You've got your extra large down to small size of pizza, and my kids will chew through the largest pizza available. But when it comes to chronic pain and illness, we've had to acknowledge that my wife and I, like, we tend to be the neurotic, overdriven type A firstborn personalities who say yes to way too much. Like, that's just always been who we are. And so chronic pain and illness has forced us to acknowledge that we've gone from the extra large pizza down to the small pizza in terms of our ability to actually do stuff. And that's meant the loss of a lot of things, which I know for those listening, it's the same thing for y'all. Uh, so Kate and I, we had to see, when I say sit down, I don't mean that we had like a just one meeting where we decided this is what
Right.
life will look like. No, it's a constant renegotiation of building the airplane in the air. Uh, but we had to come to terms with what are the things that are most important to us. So for us, when Kate's health absolutely fell apart, we decided that a couple things are most important. One was our kids. So we've got young kids about to turn 10, about to turn 8, and just turned 4. Um, so like chronic pain and illness world is all that the littlest one has ever known, because um, it's just been the tone of her. Actually, all of them. Come to think of it, all in various different forms of chronic pain and illness. That's all they've ever known. But our desire has been to give them as normal a childhood as possible. So that meant education, that meant activities, and that meant a lot of family time together. So we organize our life around our kids, knowing that we probably have them for about 18 years, and then life will shift. So for us, we decided to cut out like church community groups, and we decided to cut out most of having people over at this point. We used to have about 3 families over a week. We're huge into hospitality, and now like maybe one a quarter or one every 6 months, because it takes too much energy to do that. And we want to prioritize our kids right now over over maybe importing people into our home. And that's going to look different for different couples, right?
Right.
For Kate personally, it's looked like she wants to spend a lot of her time doing some of her art and doing her she does counseling as well. A lot of folks who struggle with chronic pain and illness. For me, it's I work, and then I really enjoy running. So running's kind of my hobby. And so we've each isolated, this is like our responsibilities, and then this is our fun thing. And we view the fun thing as pretty non-negotiable, for the sake of giving ourselves that space to care for ourselves in something that's different and delightful and such. And we do far less than we used to, but that's okay, because we decided, let's do 4 or 5 things really well, as opposed to doing 12 things badly, because we're not the extra large pizza anymore. We're the small personal pan pizza.
Appreciate you sharing that perspective. It's helpful, even as I think about my own relationship. My wife's name, by the way, is Katie, so pretty similar.
Ah, there you go. It's a good
Yeah,
name.
it is. That's right. And I just appreciate in how we think about things, and especially like that where you said about the fun things being non-negotiable. Because some people would see it the opposite, right? Well, the fun stuff is the optional part. But I agree with you. We need to enjoy life. God intends this for us to enjoy it, and it's the only way we can really navigate the difficulties that we're under is to be able to find some things that we, enjoy. And so I have my things. Which, by the way, I just have to throw in there because I see you're a Lord of the Rings fan. That's one of my,
Hey, yo.
yeah, that's one of my things to do, is kind of escape into the world that Tolkien has provided for us, and I'm enriched by that, and so I needed those things. I can remember getting into a study of Greek, New Testament Greek, because I was a preacher, pastor for over 20 years before I just recently became the executive director of Broken and Mended. And it's funny though with that, when I was in school, I didn't want to do Greek. I was always I dreaded it, like a
You and
lot
me
of
both, brother.
yeah. I didn't want anything to do with it. But later on, for whatever reason, just kind of got inspired to get into it, and it just became this hobby of mine, and one that was enriching. And so it's most people would not consider studying Greek to be fun. I understand that, but
Mhm.
for me, I found things that were enriching and enjoyable to me that had nothing to do with chronic illness and chronic pain, because I needed to be able to do that. So yeah, I really appreciated your
Yeah.
perspective on that. I appreciated
You
too.
know,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, Nate, go ahead.
we had a moment like this yesterday. It's fresh on my mind. My kids got my genetics, which means that they're allergic to everything that blooms.
Okay.
So we took them to the allergist and did a little testing, and sure enough, it looked like they had chicken pox. Right, just everything
Mm,
lit up. It seemed like. So they need to start doing allergy shots. And the day that really we can do allergy shots is Friday mornings, right before school. But that's the time that I have booked out for me to go on a long run. So long runs for me are usually about 3 to 4 hours. Um, so uh, so Kate was like, "I got it, I got it. We can do it. Like I'm happy to do these." And that was a product of her staring at my schedule and being like, "No, it's important for you to do that because you're a better person when you're able to do those
oh
things."
wow.
And I love that. And actually, we wound up negotiating and being like, "Actually, I think I can handle this." Me, Nate, doing it so long as you're able to watch like our daughter later in the day, because it just shifts the hours that I'd be down. And so we negotiated that out. But it struck me how never was my wife like, it's just running. Like our kids should matter more, and of course they matter more, right, than any hobby. But I was struck by her sense of like, no, her attempts to safeguard my kind of big block of time, where I'm able to really work through and process a lot of just the trouble, and then also have a really great time out running trails in nature there. So that's a beautiful example of how my wife, as the chronic pain and illness sufferer, was prioritizing um, my hobby, but it's a hobby that lets my soul actually recover and be able to run the race that is chronic pain and illness.
Mm. That's a touching example of love. I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciated just you have quite a few illustrations you were used running in your book, and the one that I kind of remember was the three guys that um, were struggling after, I think you had some kind of injury or something early
Yeah,
on.
that
Is
was
that
a big
right?
race, and yes, that was a 50K race, and I'd gotten hurt a little bit early in it and just was really struggling to finish. And there were three guys that ran by me, and given the amount of four-letter words coming out of their mouth, they weren't doing well either.
Right.
But they were doing better than I am, and I just kind of hooked onto the back of the train
Yeah.
and stuck with them as long as I could. And they really dragged me to be actually finishing it before the cutoff, and I wouldn't have made it without them. And yeah, it's a good example of how we really do need other people.
Was
Hopefully,
that
ones that
your?
are cussing a little bit less in the chronic pain and illness world.
Yeah, that'd be yeah. Was that in your Cloud of Witnesses chapter? I couldn't remember where that
I
was.
don't remember where it is.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, well, that was a powerful chapter too, and I did want to touch on one other thing here about you bring up in your book, and it's kind of expanding out from what we've been talking about, family, spouse, and family relationships, to really thinking about the broader community. And you talk some when you're talking about this in your book about how things you're not connected to your community in the same way because your rhythms of life have been disrupted. Of course, your book is Disrupted Journey, and I think that it's very important to recognize that. But you also talk about the isolation that can come through that, and I just want to ask how, when we're experiencing that isolation, how can we foster a healthy community that can sustain us for this difficult journey? If we feel like we're losing community, maybe it's even difficult to go to church and be very close. I heard you mention you're not part of those community church groups. So when we're losing some of that too, how do we be less isolated? Maybe the way to ask that
Mm-hmm.
question.
I think the chronic pain and illness world has forced me to reconsider what isolation looks like. So for me right now, it's not about the quantity of people I know, it's about the quality of people that I know. So, you mentioned Jeremy Wright earlier. He's my chronic pain and illness buddy. And he's someone that I can text and say, we're on our third frozen pizza of the week. And I can text that to him on Tuesday. And he knows exactly what that looks like, right? He gets it. He's got a young family too. They eat a lot of frozen pizzas, stuff like that.
Right.
Because when it's Tuesday and we're on frozen pizza number 3 for dinner, it means that life has been pretty darn unsustainable. And having another person that understands the shorthand of life is really helpful. I know for Kate's good friends with Alicia, Jeremy's wife, and they can text each other or call each other, and they know they know how each other are doing based off of a few short phrases, and they don't have to explain things, right? They just get it. Um, and friends like that are really valuable. And then there's kind of another group of friends that I talk with who know of what's going on and can pray for me. They don't walk the same path, but they care deeply about how I'm doing. And honestly, they're friends that I can talk about a lot of other things besides chronic pain and illness with. Because we want relationships to be relationships, not just like trauma buddy bonding.
That's right. Yeah.
Where all you have in common is the struggle you're going through. Right. So I've got my buddy that I'll talk about like politics and money with, and then my other buddy that I'll talk about running with. And like those are essential parts of the community. And what's really missing are those casual friendships. So like we go to church, we go to a very large church, and I don't really know anybody there. I also don't have the energy to be able to build those like medium friendships. But that's okay because I honestly don't have time to invest in those types of relationships right now. And so it's okay. There's David Powlison wrote this little mini book called "I'm Exhausted." It was after he had open heart surgery. David Powlison was a longtime director of CCEF, Christian Counseling and Education Foundation. It's this little mini book that says "I'm exhausted," and he wrote about his open heart surgery and how 5 years he lost to them having an improper medication mix that just left him with extreme chronic fatigue, and how really his friend group shrank to just a couple people, and that's okay for that to happen. One of the beautiful things of I know you have a support group in Broken to Mended. At Courage we have support groups and then counseling as well that we offer for those in the chronic pain and illness world and for caregivers. You can meet really fast friends that way. I got to know Jeremy through a group that Kate and Alicia were both in, and they found each other. So I think what we want to think about is like sometimes it's said, well, relationships online don't count. Well, they actually can when all you have is online.
That's right.
Um, and we can use these things to transcend some of those barriers, which we're really grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to have those tools available to us. That's something I encourage people also to use the tools that we have, like, whether it's Zoom or, meeting on like a Facebook, you know, video. I forget what it's called on Facebook, but FaceTime on our iPhones and that kind of stuff can be very meaningful. Our producer Andres here, that's with us in the background. I've never met Andres in person. I consider him to be one of my best friends, and so it's just kind of an example. And I love the day that we'll be able to meet in person. I pray for that day. I hope for that day. But yes, very beautiful relationships can be formed with some of these tools that we have available. So again, I appreciate you sharing about that. And I really hear in what you're saying too is we're a little bit more strategic in the where we're going to spend our time and with whom we're going to spend our time, because we have to be. And so I feel like that was good advice for us to think through what we need to say no to. And it may be those kind of medium casual relationships that we don't have any more space for that to be filling up, because of everything that our chronic illness and chronic pain journey is just kind of drawing out from us. But we do need those really quality friends like your friend Jeremy and Alicia and people like that can walk alongside us. And I appreciate you mentioned the support groups too. Yes, in Broken and Mended, we have support groups, and some of those are locally organized. But for people where we don't have a Broken and Mended group, you can go to the website at brokenandmended.org and request information about our virtual, which is a Zoom group. And it's not broadcast anywhere. It's a Zoom only, so there's the confidentiality and the privacy that we need to have a meaningful, interaction, with one another. And I understand, and we'll talk just a moment about the support group that I know you're having for caregivers in your website. But just appreciate you mentioning that as well, and counseling too. And I know that. I think we're getting better, and we've talked a lot about this on In the Seams. We've had people come on and talk about mental health, and we're trying to destigmatize talking about having chronic pain and illness, and we're trying to destigmatize people talking about, mental health, or saying that they need help with their mental health. I've been to counseling for dealing with my chronic pain, chronic illness, and it was very valuable for me. And it was kind of interesting because I consider myself a very analytical person. I feel like I can take my own counsel almost. It was amazing to me in the first few minutes I was with a counselor, the things he was able to see and that I just hadn't considered from that perspective, just to have that external voice and a trained professional, compassionate trained professional can really be helpful. And certainly we encourage people that think that they may be needing that kind of help to go ahead and reach out and get it. And it could be really good for the journey.
I am a professional counselor, and I've got a PhD in counseling. And I remember after our littlest was born, Kate had a pretty routine surgery that just didn't heal from, and it really shattered life for all of us. She'd had other chronic issues before, but this one was the big thing that really just destroyed life. And I remember when something like that happens, you survive. That's what you do. And we probably had 7, 8, 9 months of just straight survival, as Kate's doing 12 to 14 hours of physical therapy a day. Kids have to go to school. I have to work. Working through a lot of challenges. It was pure survival. And I met with a counselor after about 9 months of that. I came to the place where I'm like, we're stable enough for me to be able to work through some things. And I remember sitting down with the counselor and just telling him, I have 7 buckets or barrels of sealed nuclear radioactive waste sitting on my porch, if you will.
Yeah.
Oh, just all the sorrow and bitterness and grief and anger and all the rest of watching my wife fall apart piece by piece by piece in front of my life. And God could have prevented it, and He didn't. And I'm teaching on God's goodness to counselors by day, and I'm having a hard time believing it by night because He seems like the opposite. And I remember just talking with that counselor and saying, like, I need help prying open these barrels because it's time and we've got to deal with it. And even as someone that does counseling professionally, like, when you're lost in the maze of your own life, um, even that professional knowledge doesn't help you too much because you need a pair of eyes outside the maze. So I'm glad that that was helpful for you, David. It's been incredibly helpful for me. And friends, if you're listening to this, yes, absolutely to the destigmatization of mental health challenges. Like, if bodies are broken, how would we not expect our minds and souls to be broken too? And we would go to a doctor to help our physical bodies. And as someone who trains counselors, I can say that there's a reason these master's degrees are big and large. And there's a lot that goes into counseling beyond just being a friend. So if you have the ability to avail yourself of that, do it. I think it'll provide a lot of benefits in ways that are surprising to you, friends who are listening to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that perspective, especially from what you do, and being able to share how you also needed that in your life at a very difficult time, and how it was helpful to you. I hope that will encourage other people to. Um, I guess what we're both kind of fighting, when it really comes down to, is fighting this isolation that
Yeah.
chronic illness and pain cause, where people don't think that there's anybody to talk to, or they feel hopeless. They're despairing. They don't think there's any resources or help for them out there. There are things out there that can be of help to you, and we really hope that you will find a
Mhm.
way to get connected, not only with your good friends like we've been talking about, but if you need to, a support group, or if you need to, counseling, or some combination of those things. And it kind of brings me to the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, Nate, which is, I've got on your website, nateandkatebrooks.com. Of course, we'll link that in the show notes. And I noticed there's kind of like Kate's part of that, and Nate's part of that. And so, what can our listeners find there? And also, this would be an opportunity if you have any other resources, past books or future books, or anything you want to talk about, you can
Mhm.
tell our listeners about.
Yeah, that website is very much under construction, I believe. Uh, but yeah, so my wife does counseling, and she mainly meets with individuals who are struggling with chronic pain and illness, and then also with teens. And she's a fantastic counselor. Um, and then my site contains a lot of resources that I've written uh, and uh, and counseling as well. Probably the better place to go is couragechristiancounseling.com. If someone's wanting to meet with me or Kate for counseling, or part of our team, Jeremy and Alicia Wright are actually counselors at the practice too. Um, if someone's wanting more resources, in terms of the chronic pain and illness space, this book is mainly what I've written, and then the two articles from the Biblical Counseling Coalition. I think there's some other podcasts floating around surrounding this book as well, just variations on the same conversation. A lot of the resources that I've put out have been more related to how do we think about theology and psychology, and then how do we think about abuse and things of that nature. But it made me really happy to write this book. I remember sitting down with the publisher saying, I care about this Disrupted Journey book because it's like a personal passion project. It's not coming from the professional space of like, I'm going to write this as someone who is a counselor who has met with people for 20 years dealing with chronic pain and illness. No, this is me. This is my life. And I think because of that, it's a more visceral book than anything I've written before, because it's life meets God. It's not the professional side of things. So there's other books in the work, but those are all focused on like abuse and caring for abusers is the number one group that I meet with are abusive husbands. So that's kind of a lot of what's out there.
All right. Yeah, appreciate that. And I can certainly testify to the visceral nature of the book that we've been discussing today. And it felt very real, very personal, and transparent. And all the things you would want to have if you have this struggle and you're going to read a book about this. You don't want it to be just an academic, philosophical, somewhat removed type experience. You want to feel like you're right there with the author. So I can certainly testify that that's the case here. And so really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and and certainly we'll hope that God will continue to bless you and Kate as you continue to minister to people who are hurting, even as you yourself are still hurting. But we just appreciate you being on the show. And I think
Thanks
this is
so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's going to be a blessing for others. And I'm always excited to be able to put something out there that is not just about the people that have the chronic health condition, and particularly on this subject when we're talking about people, loved ones, the caregivers, the spouses, and other family members and close friends that are trying to be a blessing to the hurting people in their lives, but also carrying such a heavy burden. And with that, I want to mention another resource, and we'll link this in the show notes. But Emily Maritz from Australia, and her website calledtowatch.com. And the reason why I bring it up is because we've actually interviewed Emily on this podcast. I think it was one of my very first ones we did, and I'm going to put that in the show notes as well, because Emily talks about it from a little bit. She was very young when she started her Called to Watch, and a little bit similar to you. I think she started to write a few blog posts, and she got so much response from it, then it really became the focus of her ministry. And she calls people that are to support people with chronic illness, chronic pain, watchers, and that's why it's called calledtowatch.com. But
That's
she
a good
deals,
term.
yeah, and she deals with it from a different perspective as a daughter, a young daughter, and then also a sister that had chronic health issues, very serious chronic health issues, and how she was trying to be there for them and how she was feeling overwhelmed by that. And it's very personal. So I just wanted to point that out. I'll link both her website as well as that original podcast interview that I had with her. And so we're going to sign off at this time, but we encourage you to go to brokenandmended.org to see what we have available there. And in terms of support groups, blog posts, you can also find this podcast there. You've already found it somewhere else, probably, if you're listening to it, but the podcast is there in the seams. And, also, as we mentioned, the support group information and opportunity. If you are so inclined or inspired to do so, and you want to partner with us financially in this, there's a donate button there as well. And that's not meant to add a burden to anyone else, but God moves someone to do so. We want to just make sure that that opportunity is provided for you as well. So glad you were able to be with us on In the Seams, and look forward to being together next time.